Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to do is share my screen now and just go through the agenda for today. It's taking a little time to come up, but we... Okay, so can everybody see a slide called Members Election Forum?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm seeing that. Yeah. Okay. So the agenda is the welcome, which I've just done. And then we're going to talk about the IKA. And I don't think it's too strong a point to call it the IKA family, because certainly I've never met, since I've arrived, a group of people who are as warm and as kind, as caring. And then our values, which are obviously really important to us. And then I'll move into the elections and how we're proposing to run the election, how we're running the elections, what roles are available, and then try and encourage as many people as possible to volunteer, do a bit of a sales pitch around that. And then we break into the breakout rooms and ask people to answer 2 questions and appoint a note taker and give feedback in the main session. So hopefully we'll address as many questions as possible. And then what we always do is we ask people to rate the meeting. We want to make sure that, you know, when you come to these meetings, you feel your time is useful, that we haven't wasted your time. And then I'll hand over to our chair, Colin Mckenzie, who will just do a conclusion. Okay. So the first thing is our values. And, you know, we've always had these values, but it's only in the recent strategy that we launched that we kind of wrote these down and made them much clearer. We're all about the patients. Really, really important. Patients come first, and I see that in staff, I see it in the volunteers, I see it at board level, at branch level. We might have differences of opinion about how we do this, but you know, there's a really clear focus on patients. Volunteerism, really, really important. And I think it's fair to say not many charities would be as strong in terms of the quality. We may have a small number of volunteers, but we have, you know, huge passion and huge commitment. And I was very surprised when I started researching this job to see just how small the staff team is, because so much is actually done by the volunteers. Equality, really important that we treat everybody equally and we make sure nobody is discriminated against or treated differently because of who they are or who they know. And then partnership. As a small organization, we have to work in partnership with other organizations. And then we need to be innovative. You know, we need to find new ways of working and bringing in innovation into the healthcare system. And then finally, quality, that everything we do, we try and actually have a quality approach, that we set the highest standards for ourselves. So these are the values that you, the members, have contributed to, and that these have to underpin everything that we do. And you may remember our strategic objectives, which we launched at the AGM. Our full strategic plan can be downloaded from the website, or if you'd like a hard copy, it's available in print. Just send an email to info@ika.ie. And, you know, there's kind of a couple of clear themes. Obviously, everything we do is about supporting patients and their families. You know, so that's more about, you know, the Beaumont Support Centre, counselling, peer support that goes on. And then living life well is more about the holidays and getting people abroad and providing activities that help people to feel good about themselves. Yeah. And then dynamic and active branches is really important because, you know, we're nothing without the branches. And then organisational fitness. Now, you know, this can be quite, you know, some people think this is boring. But in fact, this is key to what we do, because we have a charities governance code which places legal responsibilities on us in terms of how we operate. We've got to be transparent, we've got to be accountable, but also if we don't have an organisation that can deliver on these things, then we're not going to get very far. And then researching, campaigning and advocacy, that we actually develop a much stronger competency and capability so that we can campaign more effectively. And we've started doing that, but we need to build that up. So these are our strategic objectives. And basically, if it's not in this, then we don't do it, because it's a very challenging plan, really, really challenging. So we've got to make sure we focus on this and don't get spread too thinly, because that is a problem for a lot of charities. And then they end up delivering on nothing. So if I can get the technology to work. This is what I was saying earlier about suddenly it stops working. Okay, and you have to go back. So that's just a quick overview. We've gone through that in more detail. So we now talk about the elections, which is what we're here to talk about today. So under our constitution, we've got to hold elections every 2 years. Because of COVID, we deferred it last year because we were very hopeful that COVID would be gone this year. And I think we are making progress, but it's still there. And so the 4 roles, and many of you will be familiar with this. One is a national director on the national board. So each branch has the right to appoint a director to the national board. One is a branch chairperson, one is a branch treasurer, and one is a branch secretary. And eligibility is all renal patients who have 1 vote. So once you were a member approved at the last board meeting, you have a vote. But if you're a patient, but if you're not a patient, you must have at least 3 years standing to have a vote. And you can also appoint a proxy, and associate members shall not be entitled to vote. So this is something that legally we have to do. We have to have these elections. And the big problem is that we normally had these at branch AGMs, but as we know, we're not holding physical meetings, and a lot of people can't use Zoom. So the board put a considerable amount of time and effort into this and felt what would be the fairest and most transparent way to do elections. And the decision was to go postal. So basically, there's no show of hands. There may be AGMs and individual branches who feel they have enough people to come on Zoom may hold an AGM, but in terms of elections, in order to have an above board transparent election, there's no show of hands. So basically, because we're going postal, there's 2 phases to this election. There's the nomination phase, because obviously somebody has to be nominated before you can actually vote for them. So there's 2 phases. So step 1, which is happening this week, is that the nomination forms are going out to all eligible voting members. So you should be receiving in the post this week an article explaining what the elections are about, and then the actual nomination form itself. There'll be a free post envelope. So we're asking you to return that by the 22nd of April, once you've made your choice. And then when we get in the nomination forms, we'll then check that it's a valid nomination, and I'll come to that in a minute. And then we prepare in Donor House the ballot papers, the voting paper with the eligible nominated candidates, and they will go out on the 29th of April, and again by free post. And then members complete and return the voting papers in the free post envelopes by the 13th of May. And then to make sure that everything is above board, 2 staff and nominated directors will open the ballot papers, record and count the votes. So the voting papers, when they come in, they'll be date stamped, but they won't be opened. They'll be kept in a safe. Okay. And so going into a little bit more detail on that. So if we look at nominations, the first thing to do is decide who do you want to nominate for all 4 roles. And you can actually nominate yourself as well, okay? You don't have to, we're deliberately trying to keep this very, very simple because it's our first time doing it. And then if you're nominating somebody else, make sure you have their consent to being nominated, right? So if you don't have their contact details, you can get on to your branch secretary or Donor House and they will ask the nominee to contact you, okay? And get the nominee's consent, because what we don't want happening is people being nominated and then they don't want to take the job. Okay, so that's important. And then return the nominations paper by the 22nd of April. Okay. And the technology is messing up again. So voting, you must be eligible to vote. Only those people who are eligible to vote will receive a ballot paper. So we'll be writing to the people who aren't eligible to vote, because we do have about 100 members who won't be eligible to vote. And we'll be asking you to vote for 1 nominee opposite each of the 4 roles and return the completed ballot paper to Donor House by the 13th of May. Now you have 4 votes because there's 4 roles, but you might not know 4 people that you want to vote for. Or you might have, so you might say, well, I only want to vote for so-and-so for national director. And that's fine. You don't have to use all 4 votes. So to give you an example of a nomination paper, so this is a valid nomination. This is just test data. So with the name of the nominee, the name of the nominating member, and most importantly, there's a signature here. So the nominating person, Josephine Stanley, has signed it to say she wants to nominate this person. This one here would be invalid because there's no signature. Okay, so really, really important that the nomination papers are filled out correctly. Okay, and the same with the ballot papers. So we have these nominations. Okay, so and again, all example data. Hopefully we haven't got anybody's name in there. And for branch treasurer, there is one vote, and that is a valid vote. Okay. And then each ballot paper will have the name of the member on it. So that's fine. And again, that just helps us improve the transparency of it. But as I say, all the ballot papers are kept in a safe and kept locked away. This is invalid because the person has voted for two people. So we don't know which is the real choice of the person. And this is not like a general election where there's transferable voting. Okay, we're trying to keep this really simple. So it's important that you only vote for one person. Now, there's a lot more detail behind this, which I'm not going to bore you with, but if you go on to this link here, there's a full election procedures manual available on the website, and the board have gone through this in detail, and hopefully we've captured most of the issues that will arise, but given it's the first time, there'll always be something. So if we update it, the updated version will go on to that as well. Okay, so you can download that from the website. So looking at the individual roles, the branch chairperson role, very important role because it provides leadership, coordinates and runs branch meetings, facilitates the discussion and decision making. Sometimes they have to manage very sensitive information. For example, a patient who's in severe financial distress or, severe mental health distress, and that does happen. They provide a sense of direction for the branch to keep the branch on track, and they make sure that the national director is kept informed of branch developments. So, it's a pretty important role. And the treasurer, well, that role is all about the financial activities. So to keep up-to-date records of all financial activities of the branch, and they provide a written financial report. We provide a template for that, and we've simplified it recently. We went through the branch form because we thought we could make it easier for people. And they keep control of the stocks of merchandise. And every quarter they submit a report to the office finance manager. And if there's any financial queries, they'll answer them as well. So the secretary is all about organizing the meetings, and they send the notices of the meetings. They record the minutes of the meetings and actions to be taken. And again, we'll be developing templates for that. And they make sure that all incoming correspondence is held in compliance with our privacy policy, because again, all of you will be familiar with GDPR, and we have to comply with that. So they ensure the member details are kept private with access by the branch officers only, unless otherwise agreed. So what's involved? That's kind of a role description. It very much varies by branch. Some branches are really, really active, and other branches are not so active, and they need more volunteers to come on board. So I suppose it'd be fair to say there's a minimum of 4 meetings per year for active branches. Branches get involved in fundraising activity. They get involved in Organ Donor Awareness Week activity. So even though we can't run a full-scale campaign, they'll be getting photographed outside the greenlit buildings. Some branches run events for World Kidney Day. They get involved in patient support activity. Some branches have great relationships with their local units, and the local renal units actually ring the branches to say, look, so-and-so asked me to ring you. They've newly diagnosed. Could you support them? And then, there's other activities. But it's very varied by branch. That's the thing to stress. So I think if you're thinking about getting involved, I think it would be good to talk to your local branch to see what their plans are or what's involved, because it's impossible for us in Donor House to say, well, this is exactly what is involved. And why are the branches so important? Well, as you can see from this, If we see this as, kind of donor house and we're there, providing structures, direction over the services, but it's a joint effort. So even if you say, take the holidays service that we run, like Deborah is in charge of that in Donor House. But if we didn't have our brilliant volunteers in Kerry and Tremor, we just couldn't make it happen. And it's only when Donor House and the branches work together, that's really, when we're making a difference to the patients and we're doing it. And what is really interesting is that we find out a lot of what's going on from the branches. So then we can raise these issues with the National Renal Office or with the hospitals. So it's really important that we've active branches, and we need to provide a lot more support for the branches, and we need to grow the branches to make sure it's not just isolated, that, across the whole country, we've a broad network of what is happening, because we know in some areas, patients get great services, it's state-of-the-art conditions, there's no issues about transport, but in other areas, it's not so good. So that's why active branches are so important to us. Now, if we look at the National Director role, again, really, really important role. There are legal responsibilities for this role. It's not something to take on lightly. And I know we have a lot of existing directors here, and they will testify to the amount of work that they have to do. There's board meetings every 2 months. We're looking at setting up a number of subcommittees, and there's lots and lots of reading. The expectation is that before people come into a board meeting, they'll have read the board paper. So the meeting is focusing on decision-making rather than bringing people up to speed, okay? And ideally, branch officer experience would be useful, or previous experience of being on a board or being in business, or clinical healthcare would be useful. And again, it's important to stress, no one person has all the skills, so even if people only have some, feel they have a limited set of skills, they could be the very set of skills that are missing from the board and are needed. And we have a lot of board directors who are there for quite a long time, and we've agreed at the board level that we need to bring in new blood, the Charities Governance Code, and this is something the board has adopted, and the new board will be looking at how we actually implement this, that the maximum length of term will be 10 years. But don't worry, if you come onto the board, we're not expecting it to stay 10 years. Some people don't, but some people love it so much they stay on, so that's quite good. Training and support. I think it's fair to say we haven't been great on that. We did a survey with our branch officers and with our board, and this was the key thing that came through. We weren't providing enough training and support. So that's going to change. We've already started providing training, and hopefully we're going to ramp that up over the next couple of years. So we want you to get involved. We're only as good as our volunteers, and we really need you to make a difference with us. And, why would people do that? And I think it's because together we can make a difference. No matter how good I am, no matter how good our team is, no matter how good individual volunteers are, it's only when we come together that we can make a real difference. And that's why the IKA has been so successful, because there were so many great volunteers and it was a community. And we know that being diagnosed with kidney disease, it's very isolating. So that's where the IKA is really strong, because it enables you to meet new people, people who have a shared experience, and it makes such a difference to people. And we want that to continue. I think it's fair to say people learn new skills with the IKA when they get involved. Some of them are useful, maybe some of them are not so useful. But, it's, for our mental health, it's good to learn new skills, take on new challenges and building confidence. A lot of our directors have got involved in international organizations and are doing some great work. So there's great opportunities there. So that gives people confidence, because we all know when you get an illness, it does tend to knock confidence. And I think most of all, and this is something we want to continue, it's fun. We do have a laugh, even at the board when we're dealing with serious issues. We do have do get to laugh, and people will say, it's a nice environment. And the research shows that volunteering increases our mental health. It makes our physical health better, our emotional health better, and our social health. So even though we're giving something back when we volunteer, and I'm a trustee with a charity myself, you know, we really get an awful lot out of it, and it puts us in a different place. And one research study showed that, you know, 94% of people who volunteer say it improves their mood. 95% says it makes their community a better place. And I think this is really important. I think we in the IK have done an awful lot to make our communities better. And 96% of people say it enriches their sense of purpose in life. And again, for people with chronic kidney disease, it can really damage our sense of purposes, particularly if people can't work, which often happens when people, you know, have the really chronic version of kidney disease. Lowering stress levels, you know, 78%. And even it helps manage a chronic illness. Now, obviously, we'd like to see that come up in the IKA because, you know, that's really where we want to get to. So even though you're giving time and effort, you know, hopefully people who volunteer get something back out of it. And in our survey, most of the people who got involved had a lot of good things to say about their involvement. And I think concluding, the importance of giving back, I think, is really important. And we'll see this from so many of the great thinkers, from Albert Einstein, Gandhi, and even an actress, Audrey Hepburn, that as we get older, and I think this is certainly true for myself, that you discover, you know, it's not just about money. And that's the great thing about the IKA, that, you know, so much of modern life is about money and commercial. And yeah, we all have to have money to buy houses and that. But in the IKA, there's a sense of higher purpose. And I think this one is, you know, the busiest people, you don't necessarily have the time, but they have the heart. Now, I know for a lot of people, you know, who are struggling with kidney disease, you know, their life situation may not permit them to volunteer, and particularly everybody, you know, has challenges from looking after elderly parents to looking after kids, trying to work. But if you do have the time, we'd really like you to get involved. What we will be doing is having a formal induction program, and we'll be asking you to give us feedback on that because it'll be the first time we're doing it. So we need your feedback. We run online branch forums now. So even though we're not meeting physically, we now have branch forums. And then for the first time, for each new board director, we're going to appoint a mentor. The existing board are very excited to get involved in this. And that we would hope to provide ongoing training and development opportunity, because, you know, we haven't been great at this, but I think we can become great at this and be very much guided by your feedback. So what I'm going to do now is I've done a lot of talking. I can see there's questions in the chat, but what I'm going to do now is ask you to go into breakout rooms if the technology works. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to point a reporter to feed back into the full meeting. Now, because we have so many people, we might not get everybody. And we're asking you to say what questions do you have on the elections, if you haven't put them into the chat function, and what questions do you have on the roles. And then when you've captured that, we bring you back into the full meeting, and then we can actually start having chats, and I'll go through each group and we'll hopefully answer a lot of the questions. Okay, so I'm going to put this into the chat so everybody has it. Unless I see a lot of, I'm seeing interested faces. I'm not seeing faces saying, no, don't do that. And just to look, have a quick look at the questions. If there's only one nominee for each position, they'll be deemed, once they're eligible, elected. Yes, papers can be returned in one envelope, saving on postage. That would be much appreciated. If a branch has no nominees and present officers wish to resign, that's something we in the board will have to investigate. We can't force people to continue, and we'll have to look and see how we can get volunteers. It's a very manual, paper-based process because so many of our volunteers and members aren't on technology. We'd have loved to have done electronic, but it would have excluded an awful lot of our membership, so we couldn't. And yes, a member can be nominated for multiple roles, and they'll be appointed in order of priority, so according to the Constitution. So if they're nominated for a national director role and they're elected in that, that will take priority over, say, being getting the most votes for, say, a secretary role at branch level. So there are the questions so far. So I'm just going to put this into the chat so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And then let's see if the breakout technology is actually going to work. And going to open all rooms and we'll see. Okay, I think we have everybody back now. So we had 9 groups in total. Room 2 for some reason just didn't work. So I'm not going to ask every group to give their feedback because hopefully once we go through a couple of groups, we'll start getting the main questions answered. And before we close, we'll just ask, is there any other questions that haven't been answered? So could I call, starting at the bottom, could I call maybe on group 10? Have you appointed a speaker? And would you like to give us some questions? Okay, that's group 10.
Sorry. I thought Maureen was going to do it, but if you're not Maureen, I'll do it, Michelle.
Okay.
No. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle, for jumping into the breach.
One of the questions was, if you are from Kildare, say, can you vote for something in Dublin? Or is it only in your own branch?
It will depend on the address that you're registered as a member in and the branch that you're associated with. In the Dublin Kildare, there does tend to be an overlap. So it's down to what is on the IKA records. Okay. And that's where you can vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Can't remember the other question now we had.
The other question was about who exactly will be counting the votes.
Okay, there will be 2 members of staff counting the votes. It will be tracked into a spreadsheet. So we'll be counting the number of votes that actually came in, the number of votes that were actually spoiled or couldn't be used because, say, there was no signature on the nomination paper, or maybe they voted for 2 people in the one role. So that will all be carefully tracked using a spreadsheet. And then 2 directors will be volunteering to actually oversee that process so that we'll have a clear audit trail in case anybody wants to query the result.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Great. Okay, that's great. So that's the election. So maybe if we cover the elections first and then we'll come back around on the roles and responsibilities. Okay. So group 6, was there anybody appointed for group 6?
I think that was us.
Okay, hi Rachel.
Hi Carol. We didn't really have many questions about the elections themselves. The main thing was that thing that was raised in the chat about if there were no nominees, what would happen in that case. And we were wondering, would it be possible to kind of combine 2 branches that we near each other if that was a way around it?
Yeah, basically what will happen is that'll be brought to the board and the board will take a look at it. And if it makes sense to combine 2 branches, then I think that's what will happen because we've already done that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if there's no nominees, the board and the volunteer, you know, the kind of people who are involved in the branch, we look at, you know, can we put the hands on shoulders of people?
Mm.
Okay. So that's what we'll try to do. Hopefully that won't happen, but, you know, we have to prepare for every possibility. And it is, you know, people are busy. It is difficult getting volunteers. So, you know, it could happen.
Especially if there are branches where there are multiple people stepping down.
Yeah. That could be an issue. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Any other questions, Rachel?
No, I don't think so. Anything else that we have would have fallen under the other category. So
great. Okay. So then questions, group 4. Do you have a nominee?
Us. Hi, Carol. I think that was us.
Okay. Hi, Caroline.
Caroline Greeny in Galway. We didn't have an awful lot of questions, really. We just had a consensus that we were happy with the way the voting system would work. And And then we talked a little bit about the roles and that we would like structure and training around the roles. And that was it, really. That's what we talked about.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. Thanks for that feedback. Obviously, it's the first time we're doing this, so hopefully, you know, we've got it right, but we accept that, you know, there could be things that come up that we haven't considered. And then group 1, have you got a reporter and have you any questions? Group 1, I think, Bernard, I think you're talking, but you're muted.
Carol.
Yeah.
Sorry. Bernard was with us. Yeah. Yeah. So the two items I was saying were, one, just to be clear on the eligibility. Obviously, the person who nominates somebody will get the nomination papers from you, right? And you mentioned, I think they had to be, you know, you had to be so many years on board to get the nomination papers, right? And then secondly, can they nominate somebody is there a time period that the person they're nominating has to be on board?
That's a really good question, Bernard. Something I was just in correspondence with John Whelan today about. Interestingly, in the Constitution, and I think this is something we need to look at in the future, is whereas there's provisions to serve a time period to vote, to have a nomination and a vote, there isn't provision for somebody to be appointed as a branch officer. So you can actually nominate somebody who isn't a patient and who doesn't have 3 years of membership, and they can serve as a branch officer, but they themselves won't have a vote until they've served 3 years. So that's a really good question. Yeah. Okay. I hope that makes sense.
The only other one that sort of probably confuses, but Andy, I think, came in late to the meeting, but probably clarified it. And that was when you talked about the national director, that's kind of the branch representative to the board, or I know the person who's on the board. Okay, so that wasn't quite clear to us, right? Because we spent some time talking about how does the branch representative on the board get elected type thing, right?
Yeah.
But what you're using there is the national director. Okay, that confuses a bit, to be honest, right? You know?
Yeah, and the reason for that is that once a person is appointed from the branch onto the board, they have to operate at board level. They cannot go on as a branch representative because legally they have to operate in the best interests of the organisation as a whole. They can't operate, say, purely in the interest of their own branch. So that's why we call it national director. Yeah. And, you know, again, that can be difficult for people because particularly, you know, if decisions are being made to merge branches or, you know, that can be difficult, but that's part of the training that we be providing for people who are appointed. And we do ask national directors, we have agreement that some matters have to be kept confidential until we're ready to publicise them. And then we agree what matters can be discussed with the branches. Obviously, we try and be as open as possible. But if there are sensitive issues, for example, if, say, we ran into financial difficulties and we had to make staff redundant, that's obviously not something a director could discuss with the branch.
Sure. Yeah.
Because we'd be in breach of employment law. So they're all things that we'd be going through at induction level. And I've just seen a question from Bernie that ideally a chairperson and a board member shouldn't be the same, ideally, but because we have such a shortage of volunteers, sometimes that happens. But as we grow our volunteer base, we prefer, and maybe it's something we need to build into the Constitution at a future date, that the chairperson and the board members shouldn't really be the same person. But at the moment, we don't really have a choice about it. And if you look at any of the kind of branch organisations like the Parents Association, they always insist on those roles being separate. So it is something I think we'll have to look at moving to.
I'm represent number 5, group 5, and just the 2 questions we have weren't covered. Okay, so if you don't mind.
Yeah,
the first one we wanted to clarify is about like we'll say, I suppose I should use the word partners to be politically correct, husband and wives or boyfriend and boyfriend, girlfriend and girlfriend, whatever it be, being on in the top 4 positions of a branch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What's the feeling on that?
I know we have some branches, you know, who operate that simply because of the lack of volunteers. Good governance would say you shouldn't have relatives occupying positions. So the preference would be that you wouldn't have relatives on the branches. Now, we've started working towards that in the new patient aid policy approved by the board recently, which we will be going through with the branches once the elections are over. We'll be saying there has to be 2 unconnected persons approving patient aid. So we have to be pragmatic about this. You know, some branches who have relative connected people running it, they do a fabulous job. So why would you say, if there's nobody else to take their place, why would you say stop that? But it is certainly, I think in future years, there'll probably be more charities governance around that and saying don't do that. But we have to be pragmatic about it. And one of the things we get around this is we'll be introducing a code of conduct, and we'll be going through that with the branch officers and talking about, you know, how do we make sure we're operating according to our values, and that there isn't kind of undue influence by a couple on the branch.
Right. And our number 2 was that if there was 2 people in the same, going for the same position, and they got 2 votes each, who has the deciding vote? Is it the branch, or would it be something going back to the CEO or the board, whatever, the new board or whatever? I don't know.
Wow, that's a really good question, and I don't have an answer for that. So I'm going to have to consult with the board, and we're going to have to revert on that.
Now you see why I jumped in.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
No,
I'm very happy you jumped in. Yeah. So that's something. And again, no, it's not been awkward. It's about.
No, I'm only messing. You know me.
The knowledge of our community. So I can't make a decision on that. I think that's something we have to bring. And John is our legal expert on this, and we'll agree before we do the counting what will happen in that event of a tie. Okay, so thanks for that, Harry. Was there anything else?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Thanks.
So before we move off elections, are there any other questions that we haven't answered specifically on elections?
In our group, we had representatives from Clare, South Dublin, Kilkenny, and East Dublin, Wicklow, Carol, and one relatively new involvement made a point around having a profile or a bio for each of the nominees, which would be a nice thing to have. Now, I'm not sure if that could be possible before our timelines are quite short this time, but it was a good suggestion because some new members don't know Tom, Dick or Harry who they might be voting for.
Yeah. I think that's a really good idea. It is something we did consider doing when we were teasing this out before we brought it to the board. The problem was, would it put off people? Because some people are really, really good at what they do, but actually putting together a bio might be a real problem for them, and we didn't want to put people off. If people want to do it, I think it's a really good idea. And within the branches, maybe that's something that can be done, just to create a short paragraph. Certainly, I think the governance code at kind of the national board level states that you actually need to do a skills audit. So you start understanding what skills your organisation actually has. And to do that, obviously, you need to get people to fill out a bio or to tick a box to say what skills they have. So it's certainly something I think we need to do. And if local branches want to do it and encourage it, definitely go for it.
And I suppose the second thing, it was more shifting away from the elections, but that there are a lot of young people out there, and maybe how can we, it's a different point maybe for branches and branch development, but how can we garnish or gather the participation and the active involvement of a lot of young people that are chronic kidney disease that are out there. So that was raised a couple of times in
that's a big question. Another question that's come into the chat is there an upper age limit? No, we're decidedly non-discriminatory here. If somebody's capable of doing a role, definitely we're very interested. And again, it's something we really need to develop, is kind of a talent strategy. How do we make sure we represent all our community, from the young people to the transplant team, to older people, to the different types of kidney disease? You know, these are all kind of big questions, and we need to think about board level. How do we actually develop that strategy and make it more attractive, A, for people to join us, and B, for people to volunteer with us? There's one other question there, which I will come back to at the end, but it's not about elections, so I won't answer it at this point. Is there any other questions on elections?
No, in group number 3, I have 2 quick questions, Carol. One is, what constitutes the patient for voting purposes? Okay, people who are on dialysis, obviously, but how about the guy or girl, John Smith, who sees his nephrologist every 6 months, every 12 months or whatever? Or what constitutes a patient for voting purposes? That's one question. And the other one is if there's somebody who feels that when the nomination papers come out next week or whenever, if there's somebody feels that they are entitled to a vote but they don't get anything in the post, who do we contact?
If you would contact Aisling Hand on that, yeah. Just send an email to Aisling with their details and we can check it out. Because the gremlins do happen. There's no doubt about that. Now, just on a patient, again, it's a really interesting question. These elections are about members, okay? So if you're a member at the date that, as it stood at the last board meeting when members were approved, and you're a patient, you have the right to vote, okay? Now, in terms of services, that's a very different thing. And as you know, in the strategy, and this is before my arrival, so I can't claim credit for it because I thought it was a very good decision, was that we're not just about end-stage kidney disease people anymore. Patients were also, and you saw in the recent campaign, we're also about preventing end-stage kidney disease. But our services are very much focused in at people in stage 5 end-stage kidney disease or people about to go on dialysis. But they're very different kind of definitions of patients. Anybody who's likely to be affected by kidney disease, we'll help and support, but we provide more supports for people in end-stage kidney disease. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yes, but I think the question was, all patients are due to have a vote, right?
No.
So for voting purposes, what constitutes a patient?
For working purposes, if they filled out an application form and said they were a patient, right? And they were approved by the board, then they're a patient. Okay. Again, it's something we might need to look at in the future in terms of having a clearer membership policy, but we can't revisit the past. So if they're on as a member on our database at this point in time, they have a vote and they're classified as a patient. They tick the box to say that they're a patient. We classify them as a patient. Is that okay?
Okay.
Great. Any other questions on the elections before we move on to the...
just a clarification there where you said about so chairperson shouldn't really be a board member. Bernie Dwyer put it in there. So my question is, so does that sort of a rule or whatever you want to call it apply to branch officers, treasurer, secretary, or is it only the chairperson? I know that there is chairpersons of branches that are on the board.
Yeah.
And that's it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I know under the regulation, it's recommended that this shouldn't be it should be separated. So I was just wondering, does that count for all branch officers?
Yes, it does count for all branch officers. It would be preferable if each branch had 4 separate volunteer roles because it makes the branch stronger and it makes the board stronger. So that is preferable. Is it something that we're saying somebody can't be appointed as a director if they're a chairperson? We're not saying that at this point of time. We're just saying this is the direction we'll be going.
I don't think we should say it because I think with the way, particularly in the smaller branches around the country, it's actually difficult to get board members. Let alone get directors. So I think we need to sort of park that to one side until we're big enough to be able to deal with it. And
that's again why we need to grow the branches. We need to have a pathway for new patients to come in, you know, get involved, deal with their diagnosis, and hopefully then actually volunteer, and not feel they have to commit for life, but that they can give a certain amount of time back to it. But we haven't really developed those kind of channels and pathways, and we need to make that much easier for people to get involved. Yeah. Sorry, Caroline, did I see you raise your hand? You're muted.
I was just scratching my head. But I was nodding in agreements with the pathways about getting involved. There aren't any. The amount of people who I know who are on dialysis who don't know about the Irish Kidney Association, or who I've told about the Irish Kidney Association, and I've told about Donor House and about the facilities in Beaumont, and they never heard anything about it from anybody else.
Yeah. No, it is a weakness, and we've been talking to the INS, the Irish Nephrology Society, about developing an agreement that nephrologists will hand out, when we develop a welcome pack, that nephrologists would actually hand out the welcome pack to patients when they're first diagnosed, and developing stronger relationships with the dialysis units. And we do find it's very variable. In some dialysis units, they'll ring the local branch and tell them, but some branches don't have a local dialysis unit, so that's a problem. But yes, we definitely, you're right, Caroline, we need to do more work on that. Yeah. Anything else on the elections? Bernie's asked about an age to retire. Again, I think that's something for the board to discuss, and my own feeling on it, the board would have to take a decision on it. There is no age set. I think it's more about capacity. If somebody wants to contribute and continues to contribute, once it's compliant with the governance code and the IPA's own code, I think set an age to retire. Maybe it's more about the length of term, that if somebody's been in the role for a long time, maybe then they should retire. I mean, maybe if somebody's still there when 101, maybe then we should set a limit. But I think it's a matter for the board, so we haven't set one at this stage. Anything else? Great. Okay, so then we're going to move. So that's the elections. People seem reasonably happy on this. So next we're going to move on to questions on the roles. What questions do people have on the road? So again, I'll call on a couple of groups and we'll see what comes up. Okay, and we're doing reasonably okay on time, so that's great. So group 3, have you appointed a nominee that wants to say something?
Yeah, that was us. A lot of questions actually have already been answered about, I think, some of the questions were asked about who can vote and what constitutes a patient. One question we asked was, what do the IKA expect from a board member? I know there was a questionnaire sent out, but would it be helpful to make that clearer as what's expected from somebody who would put themselves forward as a board member? Also, was asked that do board members, even if we put forward somebody for a board member and they're elected, the board will then elect their own members out of that. Is that right?
What happens is, and this was a change at the last AGM, is that the new board will meet and elect officers, the chairperson, secretary and treasurer.
Right. And
we're currently detailing the new procedure for that, and that will be going to the board. Okay. So once, and this is the interesting thing about the IK, once a branch elects a director, unless that director is non-compliant with company law, so say, for example, they're a bankrupt, right? The board must accept that director. Now, that can be a great strength, but it can also be a great weakness, because running a charity is not for the faint-hearted. You know, if you look at our strategy, there's a huge range of diverse skills necessary to succeed in delivering on our strategy, which was driven by you, the members. So we get people with good skills by luck. We've been very lucky in the people we've had on the board, but in reality, we're going to have to get good, people with the right skills onto the board by planning. Because if we want to have more of a say in healthcare services, we have to have stronger financing, stronger governance, we've developed a lot of competencies. So there were specific rules, and I'm trying to remember them, that if somebody is newly appointed to the board, they can't be elected as an officer. They have to have served a term as a director. And that's just to make sure that when somebody becomes an officer on the board, that, they actually have some background knowledge and expertise, and, they're not going to be burnt alive. We obviously want directors to feel good about their experience. So that's what will happen there. In terms of the director's role, in the procedures manual, each of the roles are described in more detail. So if you check the procedures manual, it goes into more detail. And then when somebody is nominated as a director of the board, we'll be sending them a little pack telling them what's involved in being a board director, because we want people to be very clear. Unlike the branch officer roles, there is a legal responsibility to being a director. So we want to make sure we're open with people about what's involved.
Okay. And we said, so some people felt, and we'd just like to know, it seems to be it's a two-way position. You're either one thing or the other. You're answerable to the board. You're not answerable to the branch. Is that right?
The director has to operate as part of the board and has to operate on a corporate basis. Some boards even go so far as they actually do evaluate the effectiveness of directors individually. That's how far corporate governance is going. But part of the role of the national director is to report back to the branch on non-confidential matters. So there's also a requirement on the branch, on the national director, to attend a number of the branch meetings. That's really important. So you don't have a gap in the communications between the national director and the branch officers. It's really important the two work together. So there are requirements around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but just this is my personal feeling. Say if a board member has come in, say, as a board member, and hasn't maybe gone through the officerships on the way, or would they have the connection with the patient, with the actual patients in their branch?
They, again, at the moment, for somebody to be elected by a branch, they've got to get enough votes to be elected as a director. Yeah. They've got to be nominated. So you would hope they would have some connection. You would hope that they would be a patient themselves, or that they would have some connection into the healthcare system, either as a carer. So you'd hope to see that connection there. I know there have been instances where that hasn't happened. And again, this is why we've designed a code of conduct to say, this is what our expectations of the role is. And then if people aren't meeting that expectation, then the board can actually address that, right? But up to now, we haven't, you can't actually say to people, well, you didn't do this when you haven't told them, when you haven't done, when you haven't told them they need to do this. So we need to build these policies and structures so that if things aren't working, we have a clearly understand basis to actually tackle that.
Okay. Yeah, that's grand. I think that's all.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Barry. Group 5, do you have any questions on the roles and responsibilities?
That was us, Carol.
Oh, that was you, Harry. You don't have any questions on roles and responsibilities, Harry?
Just that I don't want them.
Harry, don't be putting people off. Harry, as you all know, is a team manager, and there's a huge amount of work. Isn't that right, Harry?
Well, along with a few others there, I see Marie and Joan and Katrina there. We should be promoting the wellness program.
Yeah.
But off the subject altogether.
Right.
All right, Katrina.
Okay. What about group 7?
Did right.
Yeah. What about group 7? Is there any reporter from group 7?
Or is that? Where?
Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Most of the questions have been covered, but we didn't really have that many, to be honest, because it was commented on the fact how basically well researched what was presented to us had been done. A lot of the questions had been answered. It was a pretty clear presentation, to be honest. The only one thing that came up was the issue about postal. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I know we're on to rolls now, but we wanted to bring up the postal thing, just saying that there might be an issue with people posting votes, making it that little bit more difficult. But I understand that's the way it has to be now at the moment. So it might, people might not even, have to go through the step of posting things, whether they'll actually do it, whether you'll get the numbers of votes that you want. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I should have been talking about the rolls, but no, we didn't have any questions about the rolls.
Great.
Other than people were saying as well that they were glad to see that it was going to be proper training, for new board members and in both branch level and national level.
Yeah, definitely. And, obviously, it'll be online for the moment, and we have to plan carefully how we do it, because I know myself, you can't have Zoom meetings which are too long. People just lose the will to live, and make sure that it's a little bit interactive as well. So we're designing that as we speak, and I'm conscious of time here. So are there any questions that we haven't answered yet that people want to raise?
Carol, Michael Kiley here.
Hey, Michael.
Will there be a returned addressed envelope with pre-postage?
Yes.
Sent to everybody?
Yes, there will.
What?
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to make this as inclusive as possible, and we're very conscious. I mean, we see this patient aid and, the distress people are under with all these rising utility bills. And we'll have an article in Support magazine about it, which is issuing shortly. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to participate in the elections. And again, everybody, the more people that we can get to vote, the more legitimacy it gives the organisation, because we want to be a vibrant patient organisation, and being able to say that 1,000 people participate in the election, that gives the board great legitimacy and gives us as an organisation when we're going campaigning and advocacy. Like I was chatting to Jim Egan, and director of the ODT, and he couldn't believe we held elections. And I said, I'm accountable, and there was kind of a wry smile when, the thoughts of holding elections and people being volunteering for this role. Great. Okay, now before I hand over to finish to Colin Mckenzie, who's going to say a few words, we always do this where hopefully if it works, we ask people to rate the meeting, and it just gives us feedback as to whether we're actually helping people or whether we're wasting their time, which is, we don't want to do that. So I'm going to launch a poll if the technology works, and I'm just going to ask people to give a vote on this as to whether the meeting was a good use of their time, no opinion, or I won't be coming again. Very, very simple. Okay. All right, so that's great. We've got 95% of people are saying it's a good use of their time, which is great. Thank you for that. And the rest have no opinion, and nobody's saying we won't be coming again. So thank you for that. That's a relief for us. Always good to hear that. And I'll just share the results so you can see I am not spoofing. Everybody can see that. So that's great that people found the meeting useful. And now I'm going to hand over to our chairperson, Colin Mckenzie, who'll say a few words.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And
it is really great. It's a tribute to these meetings that people keep turning up to them, and as well as voting, a 95% vote is great. But I mean, there are real difficulties we're facing. I mean, a lot of us are wearing two hats, acting maybe as chairman, secretary, or even playing nearly all three roles. There's also where partners share roles. I think that's not a good idea, because when it comes to a branch vote, there's decisions that have been made, say the partners have two votes against the third person who's only got one, and therefore they can kind of run the branch between them. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. It is a kind of, to me, it's a kind of conflict of interest that needs to be addressed. But it all comes down again to numbers. I mean, the reason we have these situations is to do with numbers and more people, getting more people involved. But we are, I think, and thanks to Carol as well, and board members, we are in a period of change. There's no doubt about that. And of course, one of the questions we look at is the size of the board. You've been elected by your branch, and then you go onto the board, and it's very hard to see that you've been elected by your branch in whatever county it is, and then suddenly you're told you have a national responsibility. So there's the two don't. Some people find that difficult to separate the two. So really, we need to take a fresh look at it and maybe see it in a different angle, not representing your branch. Now that's difficult, because if I'm all happy with that idea, and you come to me and tell me my branch isn't going to be represented anymore in that way, and the roles change. So it is a difficult, but it's a nettle we have to grasp in the future. And I think the size of the board is far too big by modern standards. We're not aware of any other board would have as many members as we have. We do need the help and support, but I think we need it across the board in other ways. But I would like to say, just, I don't want to be going on too long, I would like to say thank you for coming. It's great to see everybody here, and it shows it's a great thing that we're having these brief get-togethers to address different topics. And thank you for coming. And all I can say to you is bear with us and keep coming, because we're doing our best to kind of make sure that everything runs smoothly and change takes place smoothly into the future. So thank you very much. And thank you, Carol, for your input this evening. Great. Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Colin, for those few words. And just to mention, the recording will be available on the website for definitely by the end of the week, if not sooner. Okay. Great. So thank you all. Really appreciate you all taking time out to come on Zoom. Not the easiest things to do. And it's great to have so many people here. So thank you very much.